For years, the blues world saw John Mayall as an untouchable grandfather of British blues, a man who made legends. But that picture just broke. Eric Clapton, the quiet giant who previously bowed under Mayall's influence, finally ripped back the veil today. What he said wasn't the effusive compliments that fans were hoping for. Many people were shocked by the cold, brutal truth. Behind the bluesman's harmonica and professorial glare was a man notorious for causing trouble, not harmony. Mayall was known for helping rock stars like Clapton, Peter Green, and Mick Taylor get their start. He had a bad temper that he kept disguised under his vast knowledge of the blues. Clapton said the hidden side wasn't only hard. It did a lot of damage. Mayall's biggest problem wasn't with the press or the industry, it was with something else. It was with people, including musicians, managers, and even family. Few people came out of Mayall's world without harm. People used to think Clapton's silence was a sign of respect, but now it seems like quiet trauma. Think of the Blues Breakers, which is known for teaching some of the biggest stars in rock music. But they never saw the fight that was going on behind the scenes. Clapton may have been the band's golden boy, but Mayall had a tight grip on him too. Rehearsals were strict, and Mayall wanted everyone to be loyal above all else. Peter Green, the soulful guitarist who would eventually start Fleetwood Mac, didn't survive long. Not because they weren't good at what they did, but because of the continual stress. Mayall was preoccupied with having power. He treated rehearsals like military drills, strict, unending, and frequently harsh. Musicians came and went like shadows, tired from the high-energy environment. Mick Taylor, who later joined the Rolling Stones, said that being in the Blues Breakers was like being in a pressure cooker. Mayall didn't like other people's egos unless they were his own. A former member said that during sound checks, they were publicly embarrassed for small mistakes. Some people were replaced in the middle of the trip, sometimes without notice and occasionally without explanation. The band was always on edge. What should have been a group of blues brothers often felt more like a dictatorship. The creative sparks were put out. Frustration grew. Tension spilled over into dressing rooms and tour buses, where fights broke out all the time. Even if you just be fully straight and start seriously, but if you're nervous, for instance, that can put you in a catatonic state. Reports say that Clapton himself left more than once because he couldn't stand the stifling atmosphere. And even though he helped several of his proteges start their careers, they all left with a bad taste in their mouths. A feeling of being used, chewed up, and thrown away in the name of his never-ending vision. Mayall's life was just as crazy when the lights went off. Imagine this, a man who is loved by people all over the world but is utterly cut off from many of the people who are closest to him. Marriages broke up. His relationship with his kids was tense. He always seemed to be more interested in getting his next record than the people in his life. Friends said he was emotionally aloof and always thinking about the next record, tour, or lineup change. There were allegations of affairs, fights, and family members being cut off without notice. Even his longtime fans saw that he was chilly and distant in interviews, which showed that he was still hurting. Mayall used his independence as armor, but within he was a man who couldn't keep a serious relationship. He found structure in music, yet life appeared to slip away from him. You surely know about the famous fights Mayall had with people in the industry and with his bandmates over the years. Promoters had a hard time with him. People in charge left. Owners of the venue became concerned of his unpredictable mood. One well-known fight with his American tour manager in the 1970s caused the whole West Coast leg to be cancelled. The cause was an argument over setlist control that turned into a yelling match backstage, when Mayall is said to have smashed a guitar in anger and locked himself in his dressing room for hours. He was known for getting into fights with producers at record labels and insisting that only he could determine the sound of his mixes. His breakup with Pollier in 1971 was very bad. There were legal threats going both ways. They didn't provide him recordings, and behind closed doors, executives said he was impossible to reason with. What should have been a happy time in his career turned into a legal and emotional war. He became known for turning meetings into interrogations by scrutinizing every choice and idea. A lot of the time, producers leave projects in the middle. Some people in the business started calling him the blues professor who couldn't be taught. Even though Mayall was a well-known artist, he often destroyed bridges instead of building them. He was pushed to the edges by the 1980s. Not because he wasn't good at what he did. He still played well. His voice was rough with experience, yet not many people wanted to work with him. It was hard to set up tours. His phone stopped ringing and he didn't get many calls for work. He was a musical prodigy who was surrounded by controversy. People respected him from a distance, yet he was alone up close. And even though his record still meant something, people were starting to hesitate instead of get excited when they heard his name. The worst part was that he didn't appear to care. Or maybe he couldn't. He made himself believe that having a clear vision was more important than making connections. But by doing so, he became both a legend and an outcast, traveling around the very business he helped develop, which is now considered as an old thing that is too hard to deal with. More and more parts of the puzzle have come together in the last few years. People who knew Mayall well whispered about his despair, his lengthy periods of being alone, and how the exact perfectionism that made him a success plagued him. It seemed like his mind was a battlefield, full of doubts, regrets, and a drive for control that frequently made him feel alone. He didn't talk about his inner world very often, but you could tell. It became normal for there to be long gaps between albums. There were times when people suddenly stopped being in the public eye. He would disappear just when fans were expecting a tour or a new album. There were creepy times on stage when he stopped in the middle of a performance and didn't seem to notice the crowd. He would forget the words to songs, get lost in solos, and sometimes break down after a gig when he was alone, feeling a pressure that only he could understand. Friends said that there were nights when he would sit in solitude for hours, smoking cigarettes and thinking. He got more and more anxious about being betrayed, even thinking that his most faithful co-workers were plotting against him. Former bandmates said they were reluctant to talk to him about anything personal because they were concerned it would make him shut down emotionally again. His need for perfection became too much for him behind closed doors. He would record the same music again and over, sometimes to the point of obsession. If a band member couldn't keep up with his exact tempo or feel, they were let go. It wasn't only about rules. It was about being scared. Fear of not being flawless, of being forgotten, and of losing control. And that fear eventually ate away at every part of his life. Clapton said today that it wasn't only a tough personality. It hurt. Deep pain that broke up relationships, ended collaborations, and left behind a legacy that today seems more confusing than ever. What appeared like unyielding pride may have been emotional paralysis. What admirers thought was a mystery might have been the sound of a guy slowly falling apart behind the music. What does this mean for John Mayall? He is still one of the most influential people in the British blues scene. There is no doubt that he has an impact. He taught future legends, started a whole generation of blues rock, and showed millions of followers how powerful the blues can be. But now fans have to face the other side of the tale, since having power doesn't always mean being graceful. There is a man behind the legacy who often burned the ground he stepped on. A man who helped others become great but seemed to hurt them along the way. Musicians who admired his talent also had to deal with the bruises he gave them when he criticized them. Proteges, who used to proclaim him a genius, later stopped talking about him. A teacher whose lessons left wounds. Yes, a legend, but one with a deeper truth behind. Clapton's findings didn't simply impact how we see Mayall. They broke the idea that the blues father figure was always right. When the curtain opened, it didn't show wisdom, it showed loneliness. Not guidance, but control. And now fans are stuck between admiration and disappointment. As Mayall's public image fades, his myth seems to shift forever. It's not gone, but it is definitely rubbish. What is left is a confusing picture. A man who put all into music yet had a hard time being with other people. And maybe, just maybe, that's the blues he was playing the whole time. A sadness that didn't come from the Mississippi Delta, but from the heaviness of a life that couldn't escape its own darkness.